Okay, so I got this question yesterday. Hello, I'm having just a bit of trouble with a couple of concepts. First off, reason as structural and objective, and I'm not quite sure what you mean by subjectivity. So here's my response. This is one of the great questions of philosophy with a long history. It is super tempting to spend a long time explaining it in elaborate detail. For the sake of brevity, I'll seek to avoid that possibility to temporarily refer you to a nice entry on objectivity in the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So you can click on that hyperlink there. Initially, it looks to be a long read, but it's not. Yeah, I recommend that you read it, okay? I'll be posting this reply to the whole class so as to ensure everyone else gets the insight as we progress. Generally, whenever we refer to what is rational and what is reasonable, we are referring to what is objective. The most objective examples we have are the laws of nature, such as the law of gravity or the speed of light. Then there is mathematics and logic too. When we bring in scientific reasoning, mathematics and logic together, we find something that looks like objectivity. These are universally held truths that are not subjectively held opinions, okay? Often such truth is referred to as a priori truth, um, prior to experience. In other words, we don't need the experience of 4 plus 3 equals 7 to know that this addition is undisputed, no matter where or who you are in the world. We should get into the fine points of this before the semester is over. So in the way that in the way that scientific certainty, mathematics, and logic work with knowledge is structural and organizational. Okay. So for example, with the law of non-contradiction, logically two propositions cannot both be true and not true at the same time. Looked at structurally, this is a structure of thinking as much as it serves as an organizational tool to help us gain systematic, objective knowledge of the world. This is why earlier we referred to reasoning as having to do with principles, rules, regulations, laws, etc. We take this to metaphysics as a way in which we relate to the world and connect with the world. And as we've also pointed out, this is representative of how we must misunderstand things too. So with metaphysics, we must account for the irrational and the basic negation. And just remember, negation is a primary feature of logic. Okay, so this is where we identify what is subjective as a counter to objectivity and on into mere opinion. As we know from the above points on reason and objectivity, opinion is to be distinguished from pure reason. It is not just my personal opinion that 3 times 4 equals 15 is incorrect. And then also remember that metaphysics is a way that we identify things, so also see identity as important there. I don't get into too much detail there. But that's something to pay attention to, yes. So then it is easy to connect all of this to what we mean by reality too. Often when we reference reality as a shared experience that is verified by reason in contrast to subjective reality. Looking into the question, what is reality, is a metaphysical question that we seek to know and verify. And as in the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on objectivity indicates on this question, we are immediately led to the question of the self in relation to and in contrast to objects. So there we find this quote. The self, then, is known both as subject and as object. Knowledge of the self as subject seems to differ significantly from knowledge of the self as object, unquote. Take this again to the above points to quickly see a fundamental problem of reasoning as it coincides with how we experience other people, both objectively and subjectively. We reject the notion that people are just objects. This takes us to an ethical discussion that we'll have to bypass in the name of time, other than to specify that ethics has these metaphysical connections and disconnections with objectivity enough to have it be the topic on relativism for next week to introduce us to ethics. Okay, so this is really important for relativism, but I just can't get into all the details here. We'll look at them next week. Okay, so now, let's reference back to cosmopolitanism as we understood it to be, according to Kwame Anthony Appiah, whereby we aim to foster a principle of community while at the same time regarding our differences. Meanwhile, we'll leave the ethically relativist part of this problem till next week. For now, let's focus on reason and metaphysics and the structural aspects of objectivity and subjectivity in the way we interact as a community and the way I'm addressing it now. So this is bypassing some of the ethics that we still need to get into that are important. Okay, so to look at our relations with people is strongly metaphysical in the sense that we are in a relationship with others metaphysically. Okay, going beyond just the physical, right? So once we take into account our reason as structural of thinking and acting, we recognize that a basic metaphysical way of understanding consists of categorization, taxonomy, organization, etc. We must take these aspects of thinking as structural and necessary. We cannot do without these ways of thinking. We abstract from what is readily perceptual to know how we organize information and facts about these things and people. And I agree with Hegel in that all thinking has these problems of abstraction. So read this, click here and read this. This is really interesting, especially when we interact with others. So we need to rightly classify things, objects, and ideas abstractly and metaphysically so as to know what these things are and their relations to us are. We often mistakenly think we can easily do this with people. This is where racism comes in to show us that the ways in which we organize things rationally does not always serve us so well when we seek to know people. In other words, we must and necessarily need to abstractly generalize things in order to think about things. This is a key feature of rational cognition. Yet as soon as we begin to make general conclusions about groups of people, then their subjectivity easily gets lost in the abstraction, much like Hegel illustrates with the instance of the murderer, of whom we find it tough to see beyond his or her crime. We rationally see groups of people similarly in that we objectively classify groups of people abstractly. We make the mistake of thinking that a group of people are a certain way due to some identifiable characteristic, due to the skin color, nationality, age, weight, intelligence, etc. Take the now ongoing and worldwide conversation we're having on Black Lives Matter issue of white on black violence. Systemic racism of any kind takes on these problems of abstraction, whereby we overgeneralize about groups of people due to the color of their skin. Thus we think we are objective, while ignoring the faulty reasoning that conjectures a group of people as inherently inferior, violent, and in need of martial and punitive restraint, right? So the racial problems of African Americans is clearly a problem of abstraction, as is made evident with the incorrect cognitive perception of African Americans as inherently of a certain type. This is a rational overgeneralization. In this conversation, we need to be equally cautious to avoid similar generalizations of white Americans, Hispanics, Asians, etc. Bring to mind the idea that people do not want to be prejudged. To prejudge someone is to abstractly claim an understanding of their whole being in relation to how someone voluntarily and involuntarily presents themselves perceptually. We regularly mistakenly think that the objective reality of that person's appearance is representative of who that person is subjectively and personally. Racism is only one example of such metaphysical, rational, and ethical problems we have with our objective and our intersubjective practices. We find plenty other such examples of ageism, sexism, homophobia, class inequality, economic inequality, education inequality, etc., etc. I know this didn't turn out to be brief, and I want to write plenty more on it all, but I can't right now. So, yes, then let me know if this answers your questions. All right. So thank you, and talk to you later.